Hey guys, my name is Alex, and you're listening to Brand Boost Podcast. Here we talk about branding for startups and VCs. And today we will talk with Anthony Pierri from Fletch PMM. And he's co-founder and partner of this awesome company. And they do homepage messaging for B2B startups. And this is super niche, super interesting, and it is super trendy on LinkedIn. So of course, I decided to talk with Anthony and to ask a lot of questions about how to work with landing pages for startups. But first of all, we will talk about the differences between product marketing and brand marketing, because me as a brand person, I'm super interested in that how to approach some homepage messaging of startups. And of course, I saw some examples from your side, Anthony, how you approach and what do you think about brand messaging and product messaging. So I'm super interested about that. And let's start. Hello. Yeah, too long intro. I will note it for the for the next podcast. But hello, Anthony, first of all.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks so much for having me, Alex.
Nice to meet you. And let's talk about, first of all, differences between product marketing and brand marketing.
Yeah, great question. So, and I'm going to be coughing a little bit. I'm getting over this cold, so just a heads up. I don't know if you want to edit those out or not, but up to you. But basically, the way that we see the difference, and just to preface everything I'm saying, there's extreme overlap in all these different words, right? Marketing can be subdivided into countless different categories. And we're really trying to understand when people talk about these specific subdomains of marketing, what do they mean? And is there something particular when you say product marketing that actually is different than when you say brand marketing? And a lot of people use these words interchangeably, and they talk about the overlap so much that it's like, well, either we have to just get rid of all the words and just call everything marketing, or we actually have to do the work to try to define what are the unique things that are happening when you're doing product marketing, and then the unique things that are happening when you're doing brand marketing. Because I think there are unique things that each of these are bringing to the table. Obviously, again, there's going to be some overlap. But at the high level, when you're doing product marketing, you're communicating the problems that the product solves, the way that the product solves them, specific capabilities, features, functionality, showing this is actually how the product works, how you would use it, when you would use it, why you would use it. And that, in our opinion, should make up the bulk of your marketing if you're an early stage company, particularly because you don't really have a quote unquote brand. When people say brand marketing, they mean all sorts of different things. Even just the word brand, nobody can agree. What does this word mean? And some people say brand means like your reputation. It's about what people say when you're not in the room. If that's true, then the brand agencies, you would imagine that they would deliver like, I don't know, recordings of what people say about them or something. But when you work with a brand agency, likely they will not just be delivering reputation. They're actually probably not going to deliver any of that. They're actually going to deliver like specific assets, logos, colors, fonts, but then like tone of voice, types of word choice, the vibe of the company. Are you playful? Are you more serious and buttoned up? Like all that stuff that makes like the ethos of the company that also kind of falls underneath brand. So the brand as reputation definition, I think is probably true if you're using brand as like a synonym of your company, right? When people say Nike's a great brand, what they're really saying is Nike's a great company. People really like Nike, right? But that doesn't help us when we're talking about what does a brand marketer do? Like a brand marketer didn't make Nike a great company. The brand marketer didn't create Nike's reputation. It's a combination of everything that a company does creates its reputation. What the product does, the experience, the customer support, the, end to end, all that type of stuff. So when we think about distinctly what would a brand marketer do and what would a product marketer do? Like if you literally had two roles and you were going to divvy up responsibilities, what are you guys going to work on this week? You likely are going to have different things in those buckets of the type of stuff that they're going to do. They might work together hand in hand, but maybe not. So covered product marketing. Yeah.
You know, I was working as a brand strategist in the creative agency
Yeah.
for maybe 6 years, and then I was like doing brands for different startups and VCs. And when I'm looking into your content, I can relate to it, that I do it really
Yeah.
every day, maybe from a little bit different perspective and a little bit different focus, but I have like essential questions to answer about competitors, markets,
Yeah.
and customers, and team. What is like, and I need to find something unique inside the team and
Yeah.
unique on the market among the competitors, and bring it into like one understandable and simple message. And that's why sometimes it just so this line so blurs for me
Yeah.
between product marketer and brand marketer. But yeah, it's
No, that's a great point.
because I work as a brand strategist. I cannot do logos and stuff, so I
Yeah.
need to do slides and messaging, you know.
Well, for sure. And I think what you're pointing out, and this is something that we've sort of come across, is that like there's sort of the functional stuff that you do as part of the job, and then there's a higher level strategy. And that strategy is kind of the same across any role. Like a designer, a really good designer can be doing strategy work. Like you think of some companies
That's
that are
true.
design led, right? Like Airbnb, Brian Chesky, the founder, is a designer. But when he's thinking about strategy, he's talking about all those things that you're talking about. Who are our competitors? What's our differentiation? What markets are we going after? There are some companies that are very much like operations led. Like you could argue Tim Cook from Apple is like an operations, like logistics. Like he's very much like he's coming in like almost like a COO who got promoted to CEO. And he's like, how do we optimize what the company does? And he's grown Apple massively. He's not the same as a Steve Jobs, who's way more on the creative side or whatever. But strategy can be owned by anyone. So it's like product marketers do strategy. Brand marketers can also do strategy. Copywriters can do strategy. So it's like it's trying to separate out. If we take the strategy element out, which can be shared by every role, what's left over that uniquely belongs to brand marketing, uniquely belongs to product marketing. So like when you take the strategy element out of product marketing, you really are left with like, how do we talk about the product? How do we actually explain what it does, what problems it solves in a clear, succinct way? And that's going to be across a variety of assets, right? And like the actual nitty gritty of that job is like creating sales decks, creating, product onboarding tours, writing onboarding emails, planning product launches. Like that's the nitty gritty of the job that obviously gets coupled with the strategy. From my perspective, the brand marketing doesn't necessarily include the product at all. It actually, and they can work very well hand in hand. In the early stages, I do think product marketing should kind of be driving. But then I think later, when the company gets a little bigger, I think it should flip. And I think the brand marketer should really be driving. Because once you have many, many products, it no longer becomes, how do I specifically get across all the details of my products to grow the company? At that point, like the company itself becomes the growth engine. So like when Apple drops a new product, people will be likely to buy it without even really understanding what the product does, because it's Apple. And they're like, well, I already use the iPad and the MacBook and the iPhone. I might as well try out the new watch or whatever it is. And they might have a loose idea, but it's less of like buying a product in the abstract versus what you have today. So the brand marketing is really, how do we talk about the brand, the company, in an interesting way? How do we market the company? Not necessarily how do we market the product. And so early stage companies that do this well will create awareness that the company exists maybe before anyone even understands what the product does. So a good example is Chili Piper. They're getting larger, but they're still a smaller company in the grand scheme of things. They're kind of like a Calendly competitor. I knew about Chili Piper for a very long time without having any concept of what the product does. And for me, sometimes I would be annoyed. I'd be like, what does this company do? I keep seeing them all over the place. They're creating great content. They're posting stuff. They're hosting conferences. They're, sponsoring events and stuff like that. Like, that's all brand marketing to the point where I'm like, I know that Chili Pepper exists. I don't really understand what they do specifically, but I know they exist. And so the founder was talking about this actually at a conference, and she was saying that when they cold email a prospect and say, hey, have you thought about using Chili Pepper, or, you're struggling with this, when the email comes through, so-and-so at Chili Piper, because that person has already seen them, they don't even need to necessarily know what the product is. Because they've seen the logo and the brand has been marketed, they're much more likely to take the email seriously. So even in an early stage, brand marketing really can support product marketing. But again, you can't really do one without the other in the early stage. Like, ideally, you have the product side and you have the brand side, and they're supporting each other.
Sure, I can definitely relate to it, because actually great brands, they are based on in ideal world, on the great products.
Yeah.
Really. And it's very hard to create a good brand if the product is shit, or if the product is super mediocre. And it's like working as a brand manager of water. And
Yeah.
I remember many corporations, when I was working at some water brands, they say like, we are super different. We are super different water. Just come up with some emotion that we can use, because like people don't understand how we're different. And and that was really hard. And now I just read an article about that AI is like water now. And all the startups that use only AI as their like differentiation, they going nowhere, because they think that they are different with their product because it uses AI, but it's not to make them different anymore.
Yeah. The funny thing
So
about AI especially is everyone got access to the OpenAI API at the same time. So like overnight, every company was like, we're an AI company now. We have all these new capabilities. And they thought they were like, I'm going to get a competitive edge. And in reality, it's like every company got the same competitive edge at the exact same time. So this is not a competitive edge. If everyone can do it, it's not a huge thing.
And so how do you think we will a little bit skip some questions and come back to them later, but how do you think what a company now in AI B2B startup need to do now to be different from others? Like, what can maybe low-hanging fruit they can use or think about to be different on their landing page? As I read your article, your post about like user cases or some segmentation on niching and so on. What are like top things to test?
Yeah, for sure. So I think a lot of times too, people are like, I want to create differentiation at the marketing level, right? And like you said, you can only do so much. And a lot of times when companies market far beyond what the product actually is, it creates like a hype bubble that then is very easily burst. Like we could see this with the example, I don't know if you heard about that product called the AI Humane Pin, I think it's called, or Humane AI Pin. And it's basically like a little ChatGPT in a device. It clips to your shirt. It has no screen. And then you hold your hand out, and it's like a projector that projects on, and you interact with it and stuff. So there was so much hype about this product. And to me, like, hype is like when brand marketing has really exceeded what in reality has been created. And so then when people got their hands on the product, immediately it was negative reviews kind of across the board because the product itself was not very interesting. So when we think about like differentiating, you really only have a couple choices of how you actually want to do it. You could differentiate on the price. You could say, we're going to be way cheaper, or maybe we're the premium option. You can differentiate on the product level itself. Like you can actually change the product so it's next level, way different capabilities that weren't possible. Like you could imagine when Salesforce first came out with the cloud SaaS model. which wasn't really a thing. So like they changed the product, whereas we're no longer going to have you install this on premises. We're going to put it in the cloud. So huge 10x differentiator, made them the company that they are today, right? So you could do it on the product level, you could do it on the pricing level. And then the third lever to create this differentiation is to actually choose a different segment. So to take a product and bring it to a different segment that wasn't necessarily have thought to use that. So like that usually is the one that most startups can do, because most startups, if they've raised funding, sometimes they're kind of locked into their pricing structure. They've like they can't really drastically drop the price to zero. Like some of these companies are doing all free everything. And sometimes it's really difficult to create this product differentiation when you're in a very saturated market. You're with incumbent companies that have tons and tons of years of development more than you. The segmentation one is really the greatest tool and weapon that startups have to create differentiation. So a fun example that I like to share is eBay was a marketplace for anyone selling anything to anyone for any reason, right? So anyone wants to sell anything, they put it on eBay and sell it. Then there was a fast follower called Reverb, and Reverb is a marketplace just for musical instruments. So they sell musical instruments and then like their surrounding stuff, like recording equipment, microphones, basically anyone making music or recording music in some way. And they created this really successful ecosystem because people, when they would deal with eBay, they had to deal with all the other stuff that didn't apply to them. Where Reverb was completely, it was like exactly like eBay, but tailored for musicians. So everything was built for the musician and how they thought through the product and the experience and the onboarding and how you list and how you search for things. It was all musician focused. And I'm pretty sure, I haven't actually verified this, but I'm pretty sure that Reverb is probably worth more today than eBay is, because eBay has taken, huge nosedive and they really owned that niche. So differentiating, to me, the strongest way to do it is to pick an underserved segment that doesn't like the market leader. And effectively the pitch becomes, well, yeah, you could use the market leader, but they're for everyone. They don't really get you. They don't really get your struggles. We do. We effectively have created the solution for you. And sometimes it doesn't actually even need to be fully true. Like it doesn't have to be all the way as how Reverb is. And another one is Toast, right? You have Square, the card readers, that was anywhere who wants to accept payments with a card reader, that was Square. And then Toast comes along and says, what if we just did Square for restaurants? And we made the whole point of sale system, the back end, the platform only for restaurants. And Toast is now worth, tens of billions of dollars. And they're doing great. But you don't actually even have to go all the way out there. You can effectively take a more generic solution at first and market it to a specific group as if you made it for them. And then if you find signal that this group really, really likes you, you can actually start to change the product and say, how would we actually make this better for them? But if you just market to them for them and say it's built for them, you're already creating differentiation, even if the products aren't that different, because the big guys are not actually saying the same thing. They're still pitching we're for everyone when you might be saying we're just for you.
But what to do if you're not sure what segment to choose? So you need to create different landing pages or different, brands, or how to do it, how to approach it. For example, tomorrow, or some B2B startup will want to test two different audiences, what they should do.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so it really comes down to resources. And some companies that raise a ton of money, they could test 10 different segments at once. They could hire a bunch of sales team, they could hire a bunch of marketers, execute multiple go-to-market strategies all at once to try to get, success in all these markets at once. In reality, most startups don't have infinite money. And so for us, we're like, you should take a stab. You should say, I think it's this one. I'm not sure. And there's a guy named Jeffrey Moore who wrote the book Crossing the Chasm. It's like, a lot of marketers love it. But he talks about it, that making that decision of which segment to go after, it's a high risk, low data decision. So every founder hates to make it, but it's just kind of the reality. It's like, that's entrepreneurship. That's the reason that doing startups is risky, because you don't have the data of a long-term established company of like, hey, we could just look at all of our customers, the last 10,000 customers, and we can just empirically say, this is the best one to go after. you're likely have a couple customers maybe across multiple different segments. And so a lot of it is like founder intuition. Where are you finding signal with different segments? Where's the market pulling you? Where really are the people the most unhappy? Like all those kind of segmentation things, they're going to be loose. They're going to be more qualitative than quantitative. So it's not like a deeply data-driven activity at the early stages. But I think the idea would be to focus on one that you think is the best fit, try it for a quarter, see what happens. And then if you're getting no signal, I would pivot to another one. And like, that's the whole lean startup mindset, right? You can pivot.
Yeah.
When things are not working, you try something else. The thing that I often see startups do, though, is try to go really wide all at the same time, and they don't have enough time in the week to really even find signals. Because if I'm trying to discover, is there something here in this one segment? I probably got to have 20, 30, 40 sales calls with people in that segment to really even just dial in the sales pitch, to even see if I'm explaining it right, to understand the problems. And that's just for one segment. If you're like, oh, I'm trying to test 10 different segments at once, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of calls, tons of different iterations on 10 different sales decks, 10 different sets of case studies, 10 different problem statements, 10 different positionings. And then even just to get those meetings, right? Cold email scripts, 10 different versions of the cold email scripts. If you're running any sort of marketing, maybe you're more PLG company, so you have to just get the 10 different marketing plans, 10 sets of ads. Like it's not possible when you've got a team of 6 people. You know, you got one marketing hire who's trying to do this, and the founder's like, figure out which of these 10 segments is right. They're like, I don't have even time to figure out if one of them is right. So it's usually, in our case, we think it's better to just sequence, just go one by the other. We think it's this. Is it? Nah, it wasn't. Let's pivot. Let's try the next one and look for signals as you go.
And it is very interesting. And when we talk with some startups about this niching down and picking a segment, or maybe not a segment, or some niche product or service, we also talk about that. Okay, you need to see what competitors do, what the market is, what like customers say, but also, and I'm interested what do you think about this, because maybe some emotional brand stuff, but also a founder and the team, they need to think about what do they like to do.
Yeah.
And what service or product do they enjoy to do. Because they will need, if it works, they will need to do it every day. So, because when you think about, okay, I will do it like for years, and you need to have energy to do it. And maybe it's also some, one more point you can relate to think about this niching down. What industry do you want to work with? Restaurants, or I don't know, schools, or medical services, etc. Because they're super different, and sometimes you can just hate it every day if this segment works.
For sure. And I think that's like the whole concept they call founder market fit. Like you might have product market fit, but you also probably should be thinking about founder market fit, because if it's something that you can't get excited about, like a startup, it's like a 10-year commitment, like most of these startups like don't reach the exit velocity that you're looking for like, maybe 8 to 10 years. And so it's like, do I want to devote my life, the next 10 years of my life, a whole decade, to this idea? On the flip side, right, there are certain people, like I'm very much like this. If you had told me 5 years ago, hey, you're going to spend every day working with companies to help them write their homepages, I'd be like, no, I'm not. That sounds like the most boring thing on the planet, right? So there is something that you can sometimes develop the love for something, as you start to realize how deep and in depth the problem goes, and B, just as you start getting some success, right? Like on some level, entrepreneurs, especially like multiple, like if you've done multiple startups and you've had success on multiple, a lot of founders are truly driven by the success. They're like, I love seeing something grow, and I don't even really care what it is. Like if it's growing and I can help it, so again, that's a personality trait. Not everyone is like that. But I think there are definitely some people, it's like, don't write off an idea that seems boring, because in reality, anything that starts to become successful, you'll realize that there are so many levels where it goes really, really in depth. and it's like a huge problem space, and there's way more than you thought. Like, like we almost added on multiple other services throughout the history of our company. We were like, maybe we should do sales decks, maybe we should do ads, maybe all these different things. But we just kept thinking that we were at the bottom of homepages, like we'd hit bedrock. Well, we've learned everything we can, and there's just so much, like, and people ask, like, how do you post about homepages 5 days a week and not run out of things to say? And I'm like, because it's such a deep concept, and that's just one slice. So we're like, we could try to figure out sales decks, but we know that home pages were 1,000 times bigger than we thought they were going to be, and adding on something else is probably going to be also huge.
If also about this founder market fit, it's it is super interesting. I understood about this founder market fit and also this founder brand startup fit, because they want to create something meaningful. It's like one segment of founders. As you said, some of them, they don't care and they just build product and test and just like that. But some of them, they want to build, they have some chaos of ideas and things that they want to tell, first of all, to their like new partners or potential co-founders or first investors or first clients, like that will test their product, and they need some pitch, they need this pitch with idea, with some vision, with some values, and they want to put it all together, but they have too much to say and a lot of ideas. And that was really, really fun.
Oh, that makes total sense. And like the thing like about brand, right? Even if you're early stage now in 2024, that's the year we're in, right? Sometimes losing track. Even with very early stage companies, because the tools have gotten so much better, you kind of need some level of brand from the beginning, right? Like the old, like total just duct tape solutions and stuff. I think it's harder to go to market at any significant level if your site doesn't look good, if your deck doesn't look good, if like the whole aesthetic is off. So like at the very beginning, you still need to be over some level of like design and aesthetic that actually reflects something. And the thing that's always challenging is, I think a lot of early stage companies, they look at these big rebranding projects that, that large companies do. It costs multi-million dollars, and, they're really in depth and all this stuff. Those types of services are not great for the early stage companies because they can actually prevent them from pivoting when they need to. Like, I'll take an example. I have this Stanley, water, whatever, tumbler thing. Like, Stanley was originally marketed towards outdoorsy people, and effectively it was not doing well. And like these cups specifically, people weren't really buying them. And then they changed their positioning and they started selling them to like nurses, teachers, like people on their feet all day in like these jobs. And they released like a whole new line, and they basically had to rebrand exactly how they were going to go. And they're a big company, so they had the money, but some of these early stage companies don't have the money to rebrand and like change into these giant efforts. So it's like, you definitely need to do some brand exercises even very early on. You just got to hold them kind of with open hands. Like, we might have to change this. And if we pivot from, let's say, because there's even companies that were like, we were going after a B2B audience, it didn't work, and then we pivoted to a B2C audience. Like, all the brand effort work that you did for the B2B company that's selling into HR teams, now you're selling to teenagers and it's a B2C offering. Like, almost everything's going to get scrapped. And like, that's totally fine. But if you had spent $100K on that brand or $200K or whatever, you might be less likely to make the pivot because of that like sunk cost fallacy. Like, we already spent so much on the rebrand we went through, we got to just stick with this, versus like doing something a little bit more lightweight but still looks good, makes sense, has a coherent narrative, and then being able to pivot a little faster.
That's true. I couldn't agree more. I even think that these big brands, for all this, like a lot of money, it is more like a red flag for a startup.
Yeah, for sure.
When you see like, oh, you spent money and time and energy for that, but not your product. That's for sure. That's why for startups, I call it minimum viable brands.
I like
because
that.
you still need to, you decide about some segments and you are doing this landing page and your demo and everything. I believe that brand is an idea, like
Yeah.
you have something that you want to share. It can be anything. It can really depend on your stage or on your goal or anything. But you need to have an idea and you need to put it into your communication. First, you have an idea, and second, part of the brand building, you communicate it for different channels to your target audience. So, and I call having this idea, this minimum viable brand, because if you have an idea, it is easier even to brief a designer to do a logo, for example, or a deck or anything, or even to come up with some merch. Really, like a T-shirt with a logo. I think that if you're proud that to wear a T-shirt of your startup, you're already good with your brand of your startup for sure. And that's why this minimum viable brand, it's this like a theory that I lean to when we are working with startups. And sometimes about the brand, it's a problem because you can switch your products like overnight or like your industry or anything. But building the minimum viable brand like MVP, I always come up to, okay, what will never change? Like never, but what will not change? And it's about values of founders. It's about how they work. It's about their process and methodology. And if you go back to that circle, golden circle, why, how, what can change a lot and why can be, and that's why so many generic brands, because they always talk about their why, and why is super generic. Like, we want to have all people super happy and super healthy and like bring technologies to like millions of people like in Africa and so on. But how? It's what drives you, drives your energy to build your startup every day. And that's why you can find there something unique to build your first brand about your startup. Like, okay, I believe that we are bold and provocative and we are like disruptors and we are a little bit aggressive. And this is like this minimal things that you can use to go and to build your brand and somehow to change your messaging on anything and to like make people feel some emotion regards your product and regards your brand. And also for startups, it's very important to they compete for great employees, and having these things, not only like description of their product or anything, can also help to gain their attention and like, let's go and build something for this vision together, something like that.
Absolutely.
So
I love
MVP.
all that. I love that. MVP is a great idea. Super cool concept.
Thank you. And going back to challenges for B2B startups. So what's like this main pain that you feel working with your startups, and what you need, like what barriers do they have that you need to punch those barriers to just to make it work?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of the stuff that you probably dealt with, right? When you were working with all those portfolio companies, it's the same thing. It's like, I have this great big vision. I want to talk about my why. I want to lead with that. I'm going to change the world and all that stuff. And if we're coming at it from a product angle and we're like a product marketing angle, we're not going to talk about that. Like, that's not going to make it in, And so we try to have those battles, the conversations through our LinkedIn posts long before they ever get on a call with us, so that we've convinced them ideally before they ever reach out. So a lot of it is we're trying to combat some of those objections ahead of time to just really say that like your customers are trying to understand what the thing is. And you can run survey after survey after survey of like, put your website in front of potential customers and they'll all say the same thing. I don't really get it. How does it work? But how does it do this? It's like so much of the what and the how is what they're on the website to figure out. And yet it's always very surprising to founders that they're like, I would think that they just care about my vision. It's like, come on, like, nobody cares about our visions. The visions just live in our heads,
Yeah, that's true. But uh, I saw some templates on how you can combine this vision or like brand message with product message when you have like this big first sentence on like the first screen, something catchy and something emotional, but like under it you have a description like, yeah, we believe in that, but we are doing this, 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 and this, and go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes you combine both. Like, that's true.
Yeah.
So
And I think
I also
that's a good middle ground, right? Like if you have to have something like that, in the big headline, make sure you support it in the lower ones.
Yeah, great. And I know that you have this process of 5 steps or 3 steps. Process.
It's changed. We're always splicing how we break it up. I think right now we say it's 4. The main problem we see is that as startups grow, they become harder to explain. You start adding new customer segments, you have way more product features, and then you have to figure out, how do I want to put these all together in a way that's not either vague because I'm generalizing a lot of things, and it's not overwhelming because I'm listing every single segment I'm going after, every single feature. And then ultimately, how do I take those more strategic decisions and get them into a homepage that really makes sense? So that's basically what our entire process is designed to fix. And so we walk through essentially these 5 steps with every company that we work with. The first step is really figuring out who is the audience of this product that's ultimately going to visit the website, and they fall into 2 main buckets. Before you even start talking about ICP and segment and company type and all that stuff, you really have to understand, am I going after the visionaries, the early adopters of my new technology, or am I going after more of the mainstream market, the pragmatists? Because these 2 types of people are very different in what they want. Visionaries, they want cutting edge technology. They're willing to bear some of the risk of that going wrong in order to get a competitive edge on their opponents. And visionaries are very risk tolerant, sometimes even risk seeking in order to get that competitive edge. The pragmatists, they're like, I'm trying to keep my job. I'm trying to keep the lights on. If you come at them with language about how you're going to revolutionize their company, transform how they do business, they're going to be very, very putting up walls. They're going to say, I don't want to do any of that stuff. I'm trying to grow modestly year over year, and I don't want to take a big bet on a crazy startup that's unproven. So depending on where you're at in the life cycle of your company and the adopters, you might want to be speaking more to these people or more to these people. From there, we start getting into more specific types of segments. And we start saying, are we going to want to target a specific type of team? Maybe we're going to enter a company through the door of customer support. And maybe we're wondering, maybe we're going to go after software companies. That's the industry that we're going to target initially. So ultimately, we're going to surface a lot of these different pieces. What types of departments are we going to think about targeting? What types of industries are we going to think about targeting? From there, we try to get what we would call a positioning anchor. And ideally, we'll have multiple. And these anchors are basically reference points so people know what bucket to put you in. That's kind of the whole essence of positioning, is positioning you in relation to something else. So that can either be a process or a use case, we would call it, like revenue operations, pipeline management, something like that, where you say, we kind of are a great tool for this process or use case. It can also be a tool itself. You could say we're a next gen CRM, though we wouldn't probably say that, or we're a direct competitor to Gong. We're like Gong, but we're way cheaper for Gong for a different segment of people who wouldn't be served by Gong very well. And then ultimately, sometimes there are anchors where you're more positioning yourself on a unfulfilled desired outcome. And there's some examples of this working well when you're doing more pure category creation, when you don't really have a use case or a tool, though we would caution a lot of startups from going down that path. And then from there, we try to understand, well, where do we primarily want to focus this anchoring? And in general, there's 2 main ways that we see this working well. Do we want to really anchor down on the tool aspect? Do we want to say how we're so much better than meetings if we're Loom? And that was one of their early positionings. It was more of a competitive positioning against meetings. Or do we want to say more of what we call a contextual positioning approach, where we're saying we're the best tool for scheduling meetings? So this is what Calendly did, slightly different nuance, different reference point. It's not really saying, here's how we're better than competitors that do this. It's more just here's how we make this process easier. So it's less of a competitive and more of a contextual approach. So the way that this canvas works is essentially the top level row is that high level positioning with as many of those anchors as we can get. And then these sub rows below are the different value propositions we would put in front of them to make the argument that they should use us. This is more of a competitive framing for even our own company, Fletch, and we've chosen to anchor against a couple different tools and saying, here's how we're better than copywriters, here's how we're better than generic marketing agencies, and here's how we're better than just using your internal team. And so you can see that these things cascade into each other. From there, you can also see that sometimes we take a more contextual approach, and this is what it would look like in that specific understanding, where it's less about here's why we're better than these other tools and more here's how we remove the problems in each step of the process. So if I'm trying to rewrite my homepage, first you're going to have to choose an audience, then you're going to have to choose what to highlight about the product, and there's problems associated with each of those. And so this is sort of a reframing where we talk about not how we replace these other tools, but how we actually remove the problems in each stage of completing this higher level use case. And from there, we take all of these outputs and we actually bring them into a wireframe. This is how we talked about the problem. This is how we're talking about these capabilities. It is a page wireframe that you can easily hand to a designer to level it up, put some fonts and colors and logos and things like that, or images of the product, things like that. We try to be really focused, and I'm struggling to remember the guy's name, but there was a guy we saw who he said you should, if you're starting doing something, you should try to do one product or one service for one segment with one go-to-market channel for 1 year. So we're actually coming up to our year mark, which will be like mid-May. But we've really tried to stay with that, right? One product, we just help startups redesign their homepages. One channel, we just really use LinkedIn as the primary one. One segment, right, to startups themselves, and then for 1 year. So, and he might have even had one more.
I remember that he had some 5 ones.
Yeah, the 5 ones, but I can't remember what the 5th one was.
Yeah, maybe it's not important, but still, I will look for it later. Yeah. But you also have this segment of B2B SaaS startups. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why them?
Yeah, we really found that they were early stage B2B SaaS startups struggle with this because software is so flexible. It can be molded and changed.
You can customize it.
Yeah. And like it's not, there would be no product marketing problem for a D2C consumer product. If you're selling shoes, you're likely going to show the shoes in the ads that you run. If you're selling B2B HR software, it's a little more complicated of like, what do we actually say? And so that's where we found that the problem was really big, and early stage especially was very, very underserved. All the positioning experts, everyone is like, I don't want to touch early stage because they don't have enough money. And we want to work with big companies that have a lot of money that can pay us for 5 months. And it really comes down to because most agencies and places, they just don't have enough of the pipeline of the deal flow. So because they're always looking for the next client, they're like incentivized to find a bigger client so that they can wait. Otherwise, they're selling always, right? They can calm down. They're like, all right, I landed this huge project with Google. It's the next 6 months. I can just rest for a second. But if you have the deal flow and if you have people who are interested in you, you can actually do a very different type of business, which is what we do, right? We because of LinkedIn, thankfully, we've gotten this organic success from our posts, and we have found a very big problem, a very underserved audience, and we just talk about it, and we have a long waiting list of people who want to work with us. And so we're like, we can charge exponentially less than people who do similar style of work as us, and we can help come in and solve this problem in a very productized and repeatable and scalable way that allows us to actually get really, really good at the process, right? Like we've iterated on our framework, as like you even heard, right? It's gone through multiple stages where it used to be 7 steps, then it was 5 steps. I think right now it's 4, so 4-step process. And that's from iterations, right? Because every single startup we work with is a new iteration of what we can actually do. So it's getting better and better and better, tweaked by every company that we work with. So we're coming up on, I think, like 200 companies that we've worked with. So you can imagine that's 200 iterations of their framework. When other people, if they develop a process, they might work with 5 companies a year So it would take them, decades to get that same level of exposure and testing on the framework. So we really like this style of business. The build to sell book, that you mentioned, it's right up our alley. We love it. My partner was actually my business partner, Robert. He was the one who recommended that book originally, and a lot of the stuff that we do is directly pulled out of it. And yeah, couldn't recommend it more.
Thank you for explaining all this process. I really like that you are an example of what you are doing. You're like living this.
Yeah.
And so, didn't you have any like any thoughts about expanding or getting some offer?
Oh,
Sometimes.
tons. I mean, we were always joking around that every week we'd have a different product idea. And whenever we'd pitch the idea, what if we did this? The other one of us would be like, all right, that's product number 75, and we'd always would talk each other out of it. We'd be like, no, that's going to make it so complicated. Let's stay simple. So another thing too is anyone who's trying to do service business on their own, if you can find a business partner, like treat it like a co-founder, it makes the service business so much easier.
My last question, why Fletch PMM?
Yeah, I've been getting this question more often lately, but I didn't get it for a really long time. My friend, who is very...
It's all about the brand,
It's the brand, I know. My friend, he's a very clever, smart guy. He was the one who suggested it. And he said that when you take a bow and arrow and you have the shaft of an arrow and you put the feathers on it, you're fletching the arrow. And when you fletch the arrow, the point of it is to help the arrow fly straight out of your bow and arrow and hit the target. So the feathers, it's like fletching the arrow, flying straight, hit the target. It's the messaging. So that was kind of like the loose idea, and that's how we came up with it. And the PMM, obviously, product marketing abbreviation.
Wow. This is, as I believe, that having an idea is having a brand, and you have an idea in your name. It's like not a random name. So yeah, thank you so much. It was super interesting, and we had so much to discuss. It was super nice to meet you. I already said that, but thank you, and have a good day.
Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me, and you have a good day too.
Thank you. Bye.